The hospital is supposed to be a place of healing and safety, but sometimes the things that happen within its walls can be truly terrifying. In this video, we will be sharing some true and disturbing hospital horror stories that will leave you questioning the safety of these supposed sanctuaries of health. As I made my way down the dimly lit hallway, the pitter-patter of raindrops echoed through the deserted hospital. The sound of my footsteps seemed to be the only noise in the eerie silence. The flickering fluorescent lights only added to the spooky atmosphere, casting ominous shadows on the walls. As I approached the room where the strange noise had come from, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, and I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. The patient's bed was empty, but the sheets were soaked in a dark crimson liquid. The walls were splattered with blood, and the room had an unpleasant metallic smell. I called out the patient's name, but there was no response. I searched every inch of the room, checking the bathroom and the closet, but there was no sign of the patient. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I frantically radioed my colleagues for help, and together we searched the entire hospital, from the basement to the rooftop, but the patient was nowhere to be found. We even checked the surveillance footage, but there was no trace of them leaving the hospital. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every creak and groan of the hospital seemed like a sinister presence lurking in the shadows. The memory of the empty, blood-stained room haunted me, and I couldn't help but wonder what had really happened to the patient that stormy night. The next few days were filled with a sense of unease that permeated throughout the hospital. The staff and patients couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking in the shadows. Rumors began to circulate, with some suggesting that the patient had been taken by some supernatural force. The incident had shaken me to the core, and I found myself struggling to sleep at night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the blood-soaked room would flash before my eyes. The hospital had always been a place of safety and healing, but now it felt like a place of terror and danger. As the days turned into weeks, the incident slowly faded from people's memories. The hospital returned to its normal routine, with patients being discharged and new ones being admitted. But for me, the memory of that dark and stormy night remained etched in my mind. One day, a few weeks after the incident, I was walking down the hallway when I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The door to the empty, blood-soaked room was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment before approaching it, my heart racing with fear and anticipation. As I pushed open the door, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. The room was empty, just as it had been on that stormy night. But there was something different about it now. The air seemed thick with a sense of foreboding, and the walls seemed to be closing in on me. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper coming from the shadows. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do. The whisper grew louder and more insistent until it was a full-fledged voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was clear that it was coming from somewhere within the room. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio and called for help. Within minutes, I was a patient in the hospital recovering from a surgery. Late at night, I heard a tapping sound coming from the window next to my bed. When I looked out, I saw a figure standing outside, staring at me with glowing eyes. I screamed for help, but no one came. The figure continued to tap on the window, slowly getting closer and closer. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. It wasn't until the morning that I found out the figure was a patient who had died in that room years before. I had been in the hospital for a few days recovering from surgery when the incident occurred. It was late at night, and I was lying in bed trying to get some rest. The room was quiet, and the only sound was the soft hum of the machines that surrounded me. That's when I heard it. A tapping sound coming from the window next to my bed. At first I thought it might just be a tree branch hitting the glass, but the tapping became more insistent. I slowly turned my head to look at the window, and was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing outside, staring at me with glowing eyes. The eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, illuminating the room with an otherworldly glow. I tried to scream for help, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure continued to tap on the window, and I could see it slowly getting closer and closer. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. It was as if the figure had cast a spell over me, rendering me powerless. As the figure reached the window, I could see it more clearly. It was a patient who had died in that room years before, his ghostly form illuminated by the glow of his eyes. I tried to look away, but his gaze held me captive. Finally, the figure turned away and vanished into the darkness. I was left alone in the room, trembling with fear and confusion. It wasn't until the morning that I found out the truth behind the figure's identity. The nurses told me that the patient who had died in my room had a history of wandering the halls at night, searching for something that only he knew. They said that he often appeared to patients, trying to communicate something that he couldn't put into words. The incident left me with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The hospital had become a place of danger and terror, where the veil between the living and the dead was thin. I knew that I would never forget the glowing eyes of the patient who had visited me that night. In the days following the incident, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the patient's ghostly form lurking in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when I knew I was alone in the room. As I spoke with other patients and staff members, I learned that there had been other instances of paranormal activity within the hospital. Some had seen apparitions in the halls, while others had heard strange noises coming from empty rooms. It seemed that the hospital was home to more than just the living. The incident with the glowing-eyed patient had left a mark on me that I knew would never fade. I found myself questioning the reality of what I had seen, wondering if it had all been a hallucination brought on by the medication or the stress of the surgery. But deep down, I knew that what I had seen was real. The fear and paralysis I had felt in the presence of the ghostly figure were too vivid to be dismissed as mere imagination. In the years that followed, I never forgot the incident. Whenever I thought of the hospital, the memory of the glowing-eyed patient would come rushing back, sending shivers down my spine. It wasn't until years later, when I was watching a paranormal investigation show, that I saw a story that sounded eerily similar to my own. A team of investigators had captured footage of a glowing-eyed figure outside a hospital window, and the story behind the figure's identity was almost identical to mine. Seeing the story validated in some small way made me realize that what I had experienced was real. The hospital was home to more than just the living, and the memory of that night would stay with me for the rest of my life. I was working the graveyard shift in the hospital morgue. The air was cold and damp, and the silence was deafening. Suddenly I heard a noise coming from one of the body drawers. I approached it cautiously, and when I opened it, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. One of the bodies was sitting upright, its eyes open and staring straight at me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I quickly closed the drawer and ran out of the morgue, vowing never to return. Working the graveyard shift in the hospital morgue was a job that I never wanted, but it was the only available position at the time. The job was lonely and eerie, with nothing but the dead bodies for company. The air was always cold and damp, and the silence was deafening. It was a job that required nerves of steel and a strong stomach, something that I thought I possessed. But one night, my nerves were put to the test. I was going about my routine of checking the body drawers when I heard a noise coming from one of them. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the noise persisted, growing louder and more insistent. With trembling hands, I approached the drawer, unsure of what I would find. As I slowly pulled the drawer open, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. One of the bodies was sitting upright, its eyes open and staring straight at me. It was as if it had come back to life, defying the natural order of things. The sight was so shocking that I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there staring at the body, unsure of what to do. I could feel its gaze on me, as if it was silently pleading for something, but I couldn't bring myself to approach it, let alone touch it. Finally, I mustered the courage to close the drawer and run out of the morgue. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking. I knew that I would never be able to return to the morgue, not after what I had seen. The incident left me questioning the nature of life and death. Was it possible for the dead to come back to life, even if only for a brief moment? The memory of the body sitting upright in the drawer haunted me for years, a reminder of the true and disturbing horror that can exist within the walls of a hospital. After that fateful night in the morgue, I found myself unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the body sitting upright in the drawer would flash before me. The memory of its gaze bore into me, as if it was trying to convey something that I couldn't comprehend. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like an impossible feat. The dead were supposed to stay dead, and the living were supposed to stay living, but what I had witnessed defied all logic and reason. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself becoming more and more paranoid. Every creak and groan of the hospital seemed to be a harbinger of something sinister. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even when I knew I was alone. It wasn't until I spoke with one of the hospital's longtime employees that I found out the truth behind the incident. They told me that the morgue had always been a place of strange occurrences, with bodies moving on their own, and strange noises coming from the drawers. But the incident with the upright body was something different altogether. They told me that it was a phenomenon that had been witnessed only a handful of times in the history of the hospital. It was as if the dead had come back to life, if only for a fleeting moment. The revelation sent chills down my spine. The hospital had always been a place of healing and safety, but it seemed that there was a dark underbelly to it all. The memory of that night in the morgue would stay with me for the rest of my life, a reminder of the true and disturbing horror that can exist within the walls of a hospital. As time passed, the memory of the upright body in the morgue began to haunt me less frequently, but I never forgot the fear and terror that I had experienced that night. It made me wonder how many other inexplicable and terrifying events had occurred in the hospital over the years. I found myself being more observant of my surroundings, watching out for any signs of strange occurrences. I was wary of every shadow and every noise, wondering if it was something more sinister lurking in the darkness. Despite my paranoia, I continued to work in the hospital. It was a job that paid the bills, and I knew that there were countless patients who depended on me and my colleagues to care for them. But every time I entered the morgue, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. As time passed, I began to hear stories from other staff members about their own experiences with the supernatural in the hospital. Some had witnessed objects moving on their own, while others had heard strange whispers in the halls. It became clear that the hospital was home to more than just the living. The stories that were shared were terrifying, but they also made me realize that I wasn't alone in my experiences. Despite the supernatural occurrences, the hospital continued to function as a place of healing and safety for countless patients. It was a place where lives were saved and comfort was given to those who needed it the most. But for me, the memory of that night in the morgue would always linger in the back of my mind. A reminder that even in the face of science and reason, there are still things that are unexplainable and terrifying. These are just a few of the many true and disturbing hospital horror stories that exist. It's important to remember that hospitals are places of healing, but they can also be the sites of unspeakable terror. We hope this video has given you a glimpse into the darker side of these supposed sanctuaries of health. Thank you for watching.